Reminiscent of Neil Gaiman. Except it's not nearly as well written. Hello fellow bookworms, it's Katie. Today we're going to ask the question, is the Shades of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab worth your time? There they are, all three books. The total page number would be 1595, so I believe the question is a little bit valid. Let me be honest with you. I mean, I'm always honest with you, but let me especially be particularly honest right now. I kind of resent making this video because I know that a lot of people love this series to death, and I just don't see it. I did not enjoy reading these books. I really don't want to talk about them because I don't think they're very good, and I know that some people will get upset about what I have to say. This is not a positive review. I will probably rant a lot and I will use strong language. So if you are someone who loves the series and you cannot tolerate criticism or negative reviews on your favorite things, then please, for the love of God and everything that's holy, move along. Be on your merry way, don't watch this video, save yourself the time and peace of mind and just let it be. There we had the obligatory disclaimer to negative reviews on BookTube. Let's hop right into it. I'm not going to summarize the plot. Also, I will not talk about the books separately. I will just talk about the whole series because I feel like all the books suffer from the same weaknesses, so I don't see a point in talking about the books individually, but I took extensive notes on my phone and I transcribed them into my Goodreads review. So I will link those down below if you want to know my thoughts on the individual books in more detail. Star rating wise, I gave all the books 2 stars, which results in an average rating of 2 stars for the series. Now let's start with the writing, which I feel like was not entirely horrible. I feel like the prose itself is fine. It's nothing special, it's a bit mediocre, but it's not as horrendous as the world building, the plot of the characters. I mean, there are stretches of good descriptions and there are some interesting dialogues, although a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the one-liners are a little bit cliche. As for the technical aspect, the books are told in third-person perspective and we have a multiple POV. In the first and second book, these POVs are mostly Cal and Lila, our two main protagonists, and in the third book, the author really goes over the top with the POVs. We get a lot of POVs of unnecessary side characters, but usually these other POVs, one that are not either Cal, Lila, Rai or Alucard, are usually pretty unnecessary and don't really have any impact or serve any purpose for the plot, the world building or the characters. Now, I said the prose is mostly fine, but there are the odd sentences which make no sense, like his eyes are cloudless blue, which I believe means that the eyes are as blue as a cloudless sky, and she smiled like a knife, which I am not sure what that is supposed to mean. Schwab uses a lot of similes. In the end I was quite sick of it. It is that kind of writing that verges on being whimsical, but not really. Some sentences just flat out make no sense. There was a sentence in the first book in a fight where it said like the water tightened and crushed the air out of his lungs, and I just sat there like, what does that mean? How does that work? What does the water do? How does it tighten? I don't get it. Please ignore the noise from outside. I don't know what they are doing, but the store opposite the street get some things done or delivered, or I don't know, there's a lot of noise. Some words were used incorrectly, like the term muscle memory for a character who automatically, without thinking, walks to a place where he has often walked before. That is not how muscle memory works. This is not what the term muscle memory means. And then there was the sentence, the dress was ... hard to describe, which is such an awkward sentence for a book because that's literally an author's job, to describe things. so you should not use the sentence in a book. And I noticed, especially in the last book, that the author has an inclination to use the structure of 3 repeated sentences with the same rhythm or the same structure. Like he who was supposed to be king, he who was the strong one, he who was now dead, in that kind of style. That's not a thing that I would say is bad writing, it's just a little bit overused by the end, and I'm someone who notices these kind of things. What I also noticed, especially with the first book, is that it reads like a movie script. The descriptions, especially in the first book, are very cinematic. The descriptions of the action read more like stage directions. I've also, and if you are going to read my Goodreads transcription of my notes, I also noticed tons of editing mistakes. I paid money for these books. These are products I paid money for, and I expect them to be edited properly, and I expect them to not contain spelling mistakes, which, you know, happens because these are books written by humans, and humans are, you know, prone to make mistakes. But I think with a best-selling series like that, I can expect a fully finished product without editing mistakes. Generally, from the structure of the plot and the world building and characters' perspective, there are many unnecessary scenes and sentences, and I think the series is entirely too long. I think the series could have been condensed to half its length, and I really believe that this is not the fault of the author, although I think she should have the ability to self-edit a little bit more, but I also think that this is the fault of the editor. I think the author needs a firmer editor that is a little bit merciless, maybe, with all the repetitive scenes and unnecessary sentences and unnecessary POVs. I've noticed also a lot of inconsistencies with the world, plot and characters, loads of repetition from events of earlier chapters which are repeated almost word by word, from information about the world to events that happened in earlier books, and it is all filler. I mean, the series is so long, and it really, you know, there's so much padding, there's so much filler, and it's also unnecessary. And then there is this very ham-fisted religious, let me call it dialogue, but it's not really a dialogue, it's more like the characters preaching about their view and preaching about their you know, beliefs. Now let's move on to the plot. I already told you a little bit about that in the previous section. Now, I generally thought about plots that they were very unimaginative. I mean, in the first book you basically have the magical stone that is dangerous, and in the second book there's a tournament that ultimately has no impact on the overarching plot whatsoever, if you can call it overarching plot, with a tacked on, you know, villain at the end, which had nothing to do with the tournament. And then you have a literal shadow of a villain that threatens to destroy the world, I believe, I don't know, I'm not entirely sure what his motivations are. Now, the main problem that I had with the plot is that there's never really any stakes or danger, specifically in the tournament plot. Like, there was no tension whatsoever. The characters make a big fuss about the tournament and that the participants may get hurt or even killed, and no one was ever in any danger whatsoever. Even right at the end, in the final battle, in the big climax, I knew exactly that all of the characters would get out of it unscathed. Specifically one character who is repeatedly in mortal danger and is repeatedly on the brink of death never dies. Nothing in this book ever has any consequences or any repercussions for the characters, and it's just so pointless. There are a lot of subplots set up, but nothing is ever really followed through. Nothing has ever really any impact on the main plot. The subplots don't even serve for the purposes of character development or world building. They are just there to be even more filler, which results in a lot of unnecessary scenes and repetition and even more padding. All of the scenes in grey and white London in the second and third book fall under this category. They could have been cut out and nothing would have changed. The pacing is generally terrible in these books. It is 130 pages in the first book until we get to the inciting incident, which is about 33% of the book. The first act of a book should take up about 25%. Now, it's not, you know, the end of the world if the first act takes up longer. The time is not used for world building, character development, or setup in any way. It's just filler. And a particular qualm with the pacing I had in the ending of the third book, because the ending drags on and on and on, even more than the ending of the last Lord of the Ring films. 40 pages to wrap it up, and it's just so unnecessary. There are long stretches where nothing really happens. Plus, the plots are generally very predictable. I could see coming what was happening, you know, up until the point where she introduced the Deus Ex Machina MacGuffin that saved the day halfway through book number 3, which is just lazy writing in my opinion. There are no real surprises, no clever setups, but I think the worst part was the cliffhanger ending in the second book, because that was just a what the fuck moment. It ended so abruptly right at the beginning basically of the third act of the second book, which then we were thrown into right in the beginning of the third book. And I don't get it, because there was a point in this sequence, in this, you know, concluding third act of the second book, which was the beginning of the third book, which would have served perfectly as an ending point, but still had a cliffhanger, but wouldn't have been so abrupt, and the pacing would have been better in the second book. And I don't know why she did it, why the author decided to do it this way. It felt very cheap writing, and it felt very amateurish, to be honest. I was drawn into the series by the concept of the parallel Londons, and it was a big factor of the marketing of these books. The concept of 4 parallel Londons and the various degrees of magic in those Londons. They never played a part, really, and the storyline set in grey and white London just felt like a gimmick, you know, tagged on just so the reader is reminded that these indeed exist, but they served no purpose, they had no impact on anything, they were just filler. I think this is an exceptional waste of potential. The concept of the worlds, you know, would have been so cool, and I would have loved to read about them, but it's just the execution was very, very underwhelming. But I believe what I hate the most is that no one in this book faces consequences. And I think the prime example for that being Lila killing political allies in their sleep, not facing any consequences for that, and when it comes finally to tension between these political allies, this incident being completely swept under the rug and not even acknowledged by anyone. And I just can't. Who let this go through editing? Let's shit on the characters a little bit. We have in the first 2 books 2 main characters. One is Cal, who is from Red London. He's this self-absorbed, whiny prince that mopes all day and makes the worst decisions. He's constantly complaining about his hard life, although it's not really that hard because he was raised in the palace. He's one of the most powerful magicians in all the parallel worlds, and he just mopes all day. And then we have Lila, who's a thief from Grey London. She's a wannabe pirate and she's arrogant. She is so full of herself, she's so ignorant, that she needs to remind everyone that she's not like other girls and one of a damned kind about once every page. If I have to read about her one more time, I might scream and throw things against the wall. I hate her. I usually don't, you know, feel this strongly about characters, but I just want her to choke on an olive or something. She is the worst part of the second book. It was absolutely infuriating reading about her and her not facing any consequences for the actions, and her being absolutely a pouting little brat when she does not get what she wants. And in the third book she was less of a main focus, but it was still infuriating to read what other characters thought about her, because she's not that great, and I think maybe the author just wrote herself into a story and just wanted to be badass. And the entire time I just wanted her to face the consequences for her action, which never happened, and I'm still bitter. Now, in the first book, all of the other main characters are pretty much cardboard cutouts. They do not play a big role. In the second and third book, Rai becomes more of a character. He is, you know, bisexual, which I am a bisexual myself, so kind of thanks for the representation, but then kind of not, because he is represented as someone who sleeps around a lot and is a slut, you know, and that is a stereotype that bisexuals have to face, and I do not appreciate the perpetuation of this stereotype in media. And I think for an author who is a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, that was handled very badly. Otherwise, there's nothing really to say about Rai. I think he has a little bit more of a, you know, character arc, more than any of the other characters, but no character really has any character arc anyway. Of course, we have Alucard, which I, by the third book, realized is spelled Dracula backwards, which made me laugh hysterically, and I could not take him serious from that point on. None of the characters have any arcs. They do not grow, there's no progression, and I think that is what I really hate. I hate a lot of things in this book, but I really hate that, because there was so much wasted potential. I would have really loved the first book to be, or the series in general, to be about Rai and Kel, because they have an interesting dynamic. There is some tension between them, which ultimately does not play any role or is not important other than giving them both a reason to be mopey and complaining all the time. Now, at the end of the third book, I really didn't care for any of the characters anymore. Not that I cared a big deal about them in the first book. I mean, the author really does not a good job of making you feel for these characters. I think the most interesting character in the book was Holland, who progresses from a villain to kind of a redeemed hero. This series should have been, if not about Kel and Rai, then at least about him, because I think he has interesting motivations, he has an interesting character, and he has been through interesting things. Horrible things, but interesting. All the other supporting characters and all the other supporting characters that we get in the third book, which did not play any part in the first and second book whatsoever, which just are suddenly, randomly important in the last book, are pretty much cardboard cutouts. The meager character development that we get is all in the second and third book. There is none of it in the first book. Nothing really comes of this character development though. It has no impact on the plot or the relationship, which pretty much stay the same except for the stupid ass romances. Now, something that I really hated was the flip-flopping motivations of the characters, which would change within the progression of a single page without any reason whatsoever, and I think that's just sloppy writing. Oh, and the villains, I almost forgot them because they are so bland. The villains are more like tropes than menacing bad guys. Alright, now let's go on to the world building, which is abysmal in this series. I still, after almost 1,600 pages, have no idea about the magic system or about anything, how the magic works. There are no rules, there are no limitations set up, which results in all the action scenes, basically the entire plot, in having no stakes, because I feel like the author set it up so vaguely intentionally so she could pull basically anything out of thin air. The world building is littered with inconsistencies and contradictions, and generally it felt very underdeveloped. Further evidence, see my Goodreads notes. Just one example, in the very first, I believe, chapter it is, that Kel says, oh no, magic does not require words, that is just something that grey Londoner pretenders think, but then he is required for his magic to use words, and when we get to Red London and see magic used, they all do it with words. Now, the parallel worlds concept, which was the big selling point of this series, is serves really as a backdrop. Most of the plots took place in Red London. I think the first book successfully manages in some way to use this concept, but then the second and third book completely fall short. But really I believe that the entire series could have been set in one world. There was no necessity for the parallel world concept in the end. Then there's one of my personal gripes that I have, and that is that Lila, who is supposed to be of 1819 London, a uneducated, you know, not really working class, below that, like poor people kind of girl, she does not talk like she is from that time period. She knows things that she would not have known if she was a realistic character. And is that maybe a little bit too, you know, much to ask? I don't think so. The whole grey London historical setting was extremely unrealistic and handled very poorly, as well as Lila's supposedly character out of this environment. Just for reference, that would be the time of Jane Austen, so she did not read like a character from that time period. Now the worlds felt like a canvas cardboard drop bag. They felt flat and lifeless, without any depth or substance. Basically the worlds, all the worlds, but Red London especially, since this is where we spent most of our time, felt like movie sets. You know, they look great from a distance and they may serve a purpose for, you know, staging a scene, but if you go a little bit further into them, if you see them from different angles, you know, the set, the worlds, then you notice that it's all just fake and that the beautiful facades of the buildings are just really cardboard. As a conclusion, for me personally, I am very disappointed with this series. I would expect so much more from a best-selling series. And I think the worst thing for me personally is that it had so much potential, because the concept of the parallel worlds was actually really cool, but it was wasted. The execution of this series is just horrendous. The world, the characters and the plot just don't seem to be thought through properly, and I don't think they had enough time to be developed. And the writing just needs a firmer editor, and dear God, please give this woman a firmer editor and someone who can, you know, get all the editing mistakes out before the actual printing of the book. And also an editor who picks up on all the inconsistencies and contradictions, because they drove me nuts. I just don't think these are very good books. I think they are boring, and to be honest, books are entertainment. If they are boring, they have failed. I mean, I know that I am in the very minority with this opinion, but honestly, I do not get the hype, and I do not think these are good books. While reading, I just thought, this feels like a book-to-movie deal, which I think this assumption is not entirely without merit, because in the acknowledgements of the first book, the author specifically thanks her movie agent. And I believe there is a movie coming, at least of the movie of the first book. And I actually do think that it works better as a movie, because all the flashy colors might actually distract you from the fact that nothing really has any substance or importance in this book, story, film. As a conclusion to this rant, and to answer the question of whether these books, this series, is worth your time, I would say no. Wait for the movie if you need to know what happens. But like, kudos to the marketing team, because the covers are pretty. But don't put these outrageous claims of awesomeness on the back of the book, because if you compare an author to Diana Wynne Jones and Neil Gaiman, I expect the best of the best. And not this. You guys, that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, kind of. I don't know, probably you will, because BookTube loves the book rants, especially book rants about a bit controversial topics, books, themes. Let me know what you think about this series, and if it is your favorite and you are outraged by my, you know, criticism, then you know what? Let the hate out. Let it out. Don't hold it in, because that's unhealthy. Just let it out, lay it on me, I can take it. That was it for today. I hope I will be back with a more positive review in the future. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you're reading something that is so beautiful that it just opens up an entirely new aspect of the world for you. Yeah, I don't know, you guys. I need something to drink, preferably something strong like vodka. So there you go. I hope you have an awesome day, and I will see you soon. Bye. The natural successor to Diana Wynne Jones. They have never read Diana Wynne Jones, have they?